If you've ever been confused by the conflicting advice online about dated tanks, you're not alone. And I get a lot of these comments in my comment section all the time when I talk through stuff on dated tanks. So in today's video, what I'm going to do is cut through the noise and debunk some of the myths that are around on YouTube with regards to dated tanks. So what I'll do is I'll talk through a lot of the principles that apply to planted tanks in general, and how it's actually these principles that apply to dated tanks. And we'll talk about what's special with regards to planted tanks that have dirt. And I don't even like using the term dirt because it's more of a sediment or aquatic humus, because that's what we're trying to achieve. So first things first, people often say to me, I don't follow the Walstad method, mine's just a dated tank, or I don't follow the Walstad method, I follow a different method. But the problem with this statement to me is it shows a lack of research, shows a lack of understanding, because the book Diana Walstad wrote it's just a scientific description of what will happen in an aquarium if you add dirt as a substrate. So Diana Walstad's book applies to every aquarium where soil is the substrate, and a lot of stuff she talks about relates to planted tanks in general, ties in with all the other principles of it ties in with all the other principles of planted tanks, and the three important factors that make up planted tanks. She covers all these in the books, and how soil creates natural ways of promoting these factors. The first claim is dated tanks require no maintenance. Now that's just wrong. Every planted tank requires maintenance. It requires water changes, it requires pruning the plants, trimming the plants, making sure the plants are in a good state. And also we need to monitor water parameters. And people say that planted tanks are prone to uncontrollable algae blooms. They're just as prone as every other tank to an uncontrollable algae bloom. It's down to the maintenance, it's down to how the tanks run and managed. So it's more down to the person's skill set with a planted tank than it is to the dirt. So, and the third claim is, I was going to say it's like, the third claim is you don't use CO2 with the dated tank, but what I've noticed is people don't even talk about CO2 in relation to dated tanks, but CO2 is critically important to every planted tank. So there's that. A lot of these topics I've covered in a lot of videos before. I still get the same comments and I still get the same misunderstanding, and I seem to keep putting out the same type of video, and basically I'm replying to the comments that I'm getting on a regular basis. I'm getting criticised for things, and people leave like quite rude remarks and tell me I shouldn't be doing stuff, I should be doing other stuff. But the problem is I understand that the stuff they're telling me to do is wrong, and it leads to problems. And the way I'm doing things, and I'm telling people, you should be considering doing it this way. This is the right way to do it, and it ties in with other types of planted tanks. I'm literally telling you information that is relevant to low-tech dated tanks, low-tech planted tanks, high-tech tanks. It's all the same information. So we've got all this information over here that is relevant to every type of planted tank, and then I'm getting told that all that information is wrong and I should be doing this, but that doesn't tie into anything that is relevant to growing plants in an aquarium submerged. The fundamental principles of a dated tank, they're not. See, what I find on YouTube and online, everyone focuses on the dirt and the nutrients, and they show no understanding of nutrients. So they just think more nutrients is better, more and more is better in the soil, which that's not. It's neither here or there with me. It's just, every type of planted tank, whether it's low-tech, high-tech, like if you use an active substrate, it doesn't matter whether it's Casciamanos or a generic brand, it doesn't matter whether it's a cheap or an expensive one, or you use dirt, soil. When you put that soil underwater, with any of these soils or clays, some of them are clays, the first thing they do is release most of the nutrients into the water column. That's the effect that submerging these soils has on the soil, and the more nutrients are in there, the more it's going to leach. There's no way of slowing that down, and if you do try to slow that down, there's loads of organics will create a low oxygen environment, and low oxygen environment becomes anaerobic, and then all these nutrients will be processed in a different way to how we want them to be processed. They're being processed in a way that isn't beneficial to plants. So we want to get all these nutrients out of the soil, and we want to water change them out of the water column, because we don't want all these excess nutrients in the tank. Every type of planted tank, you want to get the excess nutrients out in, like, Dana Walstad's book's got a graph of 8 weeks. Tom Barr talks about like 4 to 6 weeks where you want to be water changing these excess nutrients out when you use an aqua soil. It's all the same principle. So to say you don't need to do water change in the first 8 weeks, you just plant your plants up and leave it, you're just going to get a massive build up of nutrients, like a massive build up of nutrients that you don't need. Either that, or you're going to try and encase them somehow, and they're just going to, instead of doing the process you want them to do, they're going to start a different process, which is anaerobic processing. And then if it goes severely anaerobic, then you're going to get fermentation and alcohols produced and stuff. None of this stuff is what you want happening in a planted tank. It's just not. What actually is the most important aspect of a dirted tank, a planted tank, isn't what, like, most people don't even touch on it. And the most important part is carbon, CO2, and where a dirted tank comes into its own with regard to carbon. Like, I know the likes of Takashi Amano, Tom Barr will inject CO2 into the tank, and will inject it to a higher level than a plant, like a standard low-tech planted tank. If you run a sponge filter or any air-driven filtration, it'll gas off any excess CO2, but it'll bring in atmospheric CO2, so it'll stabilise the CO2 at like 1 or 2 parts per million. Whereas like a high-tech tank, when you're injecting it, you're trying to inject like 30 parts per million of CO2 or something along them. Like it's like a really high dose, and what you're going to try and do is keep that as efficiently as possible. You're just going to try and keep all that CO2 in the water column. But where a dirted tank comes into its own is the soil, as it's breaking down, as bacteria breaking down that soil, they're taking in oxygen and they're releasing CO2. And they're also releasing dissolved organic compounds, which is like, it'll yellow your water. It'll yellow your water, like you'll see like a little yellowy lemony tea colour in your water. Now this is just like, it's like a solution of all the bits and pieces plants need to grow. It'll have carbons in there, it'll have micronutrients, macronutrients, it'll have all the little nutrients and everything that your plants need to grow as a solution. And then if you dump tap water in your tank, that yellow tea, these acids, these dissolved organic compounds or carbons, they'll bind with them, and the plants will be able to take up all these heavy metals and stuff. And this tea coloured stuff, these dissolved organic compounds, they protect fish's gills from harmful stuff. That's one of the things of a planted tank, of a dirted tank, is we get this build up. So with every tank, obviously you're gassing in and out CO2 at the surface. Now that's what'll happen in a dirted tank. You'll get like 1 or 2 parts per million going in at the surface, and then you'll have the substrate as it's breaking down, the fish waste. Every surface in a planted tank, especially in a dirted tank, has got bacteria, and there are different type of bacteria to the bacteria in the nitrogen cycle. The nitrogen cycle, the bacteria we want are stuff that'll break organics down into ammonia and CO2. And then obviously we've got the nitrifying bacteria. So we've got the heterotrophic bacteria, which will break things down into ammonia and CO2. And then we want our plants to use that ammonia. Whereas in a traditional traditional tank, you'd want the ammonia to be broken down into nitrate. So there we got like 3 potential sources of CO2, and that obviously they're all sources of carbon, and then we've also got the carbon in our KH, which certain plants will use that. Once, like, if CO2 levels drop low in the tank, then the plants can convert over to using these as a form of carbon. They use these carbons as a chain. Every organic being on the planet, everything organic on the planet is nearly 50% carbon. So it's more important than any other nutrient in a fish tank, carbon. And the plants, they're going to use this as the scaffolding to build the structures, and then they're going to use the micronutrients, but the most important of all the nutrients is the CO2. And then the most important thing is light. I know, like I just said before, everyone goes straight for nutrients and they want more and more nutrients in the tank, but they're not that important nutrients. They're not as important as people are making out. So the three key factors, they're the least important to deal with. First we need carbon, and then we need light. Now, strange as this may sound, you don't need as much light as you think you need. And if you can build your carbon levels up as much as possible, you probably need less light again, because the plants will produce their energy more and more efficiently with more carbon. So they'll stop looking for the light and they'll start looking for more carbon. Like they're not panicked about. So the problem comes when you're running a light and then the plants are using the light and then they run out of carbon, and then what's left in the fish tank is light and nutrients, and then the plants can't use the nutrients because there's just light in the tank. There's no CO2, there's no carbon, so there's just nutrients. But what can get hold of that is algae. So then it'll use all that light that the plants can't use, and then it'll use all the nutrients that the plant can no longer use, and it's fueling the algae. Whereas if we get the plants growing effectively using the carbon, if in an ideal world, as the carbon runs out, the light goes off, and then the plants got access to all three. Like I've said in various videos, then we get onto nutrients. And like I've already said, when you first put a soil or aquatic active soil or substance as a substrate in your tank, the first thing it does is releases most of the nutrients out of it, and then you need to water change them all out and get the tank balanced so there's a steady supply of nutrients. Now, with low tech tanks, you can get. So here's how Diana Walstad's idea of nutrients with the soil come into play, and they relate to other methods, if you like. So if Diana Walstad's thing of mild soil was wrong, and most root tabs just contain micronutrients. They don't contain macronutrients, they just contain micronutrients. A lot of the top brand ones just contain micronutrients, and there's a theory behind it. And then if you look into fertilizers, a lot of fertilizers just have micronutrients in it as well, and that's because of the same underlying principle as why we just want a mild soil in the Walstad method or in a dirted tank. And that is because fish food provides enough macronutrients in small doses. Like a month's supply of fish food for fish will release 2 months supply of nutrients for plants, so it'll always be in excess, and hence why you need to do water changes, because these will always build up in the tank and they need changing out, otherwise they'll just build up and build up and build up. And if anyone knows Tom Barr's estimated index method, he doses macros, and then does a water change and gives the tank a rest. And what he's doing with the water change is resetting the tank, resetting the whole system, and then giving her a rest, and then starts again and lets these salts basically build up in the tank. But we had it with our fish food, and if we're putting enough fish food in, it'll slowly build up. We should be adding 2 months supply of nutrients, but that tells you the score. That tells you that Diana Walstad's principles are correct, because all these different styles of planted tanks just feed micronutrients at the roots, because they understand that in a low-tech system, in a low-tech environment with low light, low CO2 levels, the fish food will provide all the macronutrients that your fish need, that your plants need. So all you need is a reservoir of micronutrients for the plants in the substrate to feed on. And we only need a tiny amount. That's why they're called micro, because we need tiny little trace amounts of these nutrients. And your aquatic sediment, or humus if you like, at the bottom underneath, it's just a big reservoir of these micronutrients, and then you're feeding your fish food. And that's another thing I get told a lot of the time, oh, you use gravel, so you're going to get nutrients in your water column. Well, I hope so, because, you know, in general, plants feed the nitrogen through the leaves and the phosphates through the stems, according to Walstad. So all that stuff you want in the water column, and you want floating plants, and they need to feed out the water column too. But the whole point in having them there is to feed, is to pull excess out to help balance the nutrients in the tank. The three key factors are CO2 is the most important, or carbon, and we've got three sources of carbon in our tank. We've got CO2 being created by the bacteria, and then we've got CO2 coming in from atmosphere. We've got the plants, everything organic in the tank is releasing, it's taking in oxygen, it's releasing CO2 in an oxygenated environment. Obviously, I've just previously said that in anaerobic conditions, they'll start gassing off different gases, and they'll start producing stuff that plants can't utilise. So what's the point in going down that road and creating them processes when they're not benefiting anything? So by understanding all these processes, then it helps us to understand what we want to achieve with our data tanks. We understand what applies and what doesn't apply, and then we can start separating what's beneficial to our aquarium to what's just, you know, unsubstantiated myths, and they're just claims. They're just claims, and we get told all these stuff, and then everyone gets confused by it. But ultimately, a data tank is just a planted tank, and it is bound by the same principles. It needs the same key factors. It needs CO2, it needs light balanced with the CO2, and then it needs nutrients. So we need CO2, and it needs to be balanced with the light. Now, you know, if you listen to a lot of people, they use the term balance, but they don't explain what that means. And obviously, in a balanced aquarium, initially you set your tank up, you do loads of water changes to get the nutrients steady, and then you balance your CO2 or your carbon levels with your light levels. If your light levels are up here and your carbon levels are down here, then they're going to drop, and then you're just left with light and nutrients. The plants can't do anything with no CO2, so the algae's got plenty of light and plenty of nutrients to grow with, so we're fueling a algae bloom. And then light, and as I say, you could actually bring your light down in level with the CO2, and as long as it could be lower than you expect, and the plants could be more efficient because they're using more CO2. They're using CO2 with a longer, steadier pace, so they're using the nutrients steadier. And then with our nutrients, we need macronutrients, don't we? We need nitrogen, phosphates, potassium. Now these all come from fish food. So as we're feeding our fish, little and often, it's releasing little non-toxic amounts of ammonia, phosphates, potassium, and then obviously in the water column, the plants are going to use the ammonia and phosphates, and then the potassium is going to drop down through the soil to the plant roots, and once the plant roots come into contact with these nutrients, they can absorb them. And then we got our micronutrients. We've got calcium, magnesium. These come from water, but if your water levels don't contain the amount that obviously we need 2 parts calcium to 1 part magnesium, and then we need to build it up so that it's the GH is 8. So if we add the GH of 2, then we need to have like 4 parts of calcium and then 2 of magnesium, and that builds up to the GH of 8 we need. And then these usually come from the water. If your tap water doesn't contain, or if the water you're using doesn't contain enough GH to get to that level, then it's recommended to dose up to that level. We need carbon in the water for the plants can use the And when you KH, the carbon can come from KH. If there's low levels of CO2 in the tank, the plants can flip over to using the KH as a form of carbon and bicarbons. And the problem with this is it's more energy intensive for the plant. They use a lot more energy to create a lot less energy in return. So ideally we want them running on CO2 and not these alternative forms of carbon. Then we've got our micronutrients like iron, zinc, and then the rest of them, they're all locked up in our substrate, in our humus, if you like, in the sediment at the bottom. This is just a massive reservoir of these micronutrients, and as long as the plant roots have got access to this, then the plant roots get all the nutrients they need, and it's steadily topped up as we're feeding the tank, as plant leaves are breaking down, as bacteria is dying. But all this needs to happen in a oxygenated environment. Obviously people will pull me and say, well, obviously, to create new iron and manganese, that has to happen in an anaerobic environment. All substrates are going to have anaerobic pockets in them. So there's all the information you need to understand the factors, the principles that actually apply to a dirty tank, and what we actually need to achieve to get a balanced planted tank from a tank with dirt as a substrate. And the way we do this, obviously I've talked about this several times, and we add 1 inch of organic potting soil, or the likes of a topsoil, a loam, anything organic like that, and then we put that in with an inch and a half at the bottom, and we cap it with a coarse gravel, and then we cap it with a coarse sand or a fine gravel, something with a 2-3 mil to 1 inch, and the particular size 2-3 mil. And then what we need to do is be promoting the oxygen to get down into this soil, because obviously, like I've said, it's the bacteria in this soil that break the organics down. They release the ammonia, they release the phosphates, they release all the nutrients, and they also release CO2. Now, this process of oxygenation, this highly oxygenated soil, is the most important part of the dirty tank, because it's fueling everything, it's running everything. And if we break this down, the whole system breaks down. The plant roots won't get the nutrients they need, the nutrients won't get into the water column, the CO2 won't be released, and everything will just go out of kilter. And then anaerobics, people talk about anaerobics all the time, and substrates, obviously we'll always get little microcosms in our little microcosms within our biofilms with little anaerobic pockets in, and these will create the iron and the manganese and stuff we need, but there's already a 1200 year supply of iron in the soil anyway, so I don't think our tanks are going to, I'd love them to, but I don't necessarily expect our tanks to run for 1200 years. So like Diana Walstad said, we're covered for iron and manganese in the soil. But like I say, the important thing is keeping it oxygenated, and then all these processes will happen. If it goes anaerobic, then it creates a completely different chemical processes, which creates completely different gases, and it's just the plants don't benefit from these processes, and these processes are far less energy efficient. For example, the process I'm talking about of the plants converting organics to ammonia and CO2, that releases about, I think Diana Walstad said something like 47 calories per mole or something, whereas the most effective anaerobic process was 40, and then it goes right down to about 7 calories per mole. I know that's a bit in depth, but all I'm trying to say is keep a high level and say that these processes, one, they're a lot less efficient, we're just wasting our soil, and two, they don't really have any benefit to the plants. So what we need to be doing is focusing on growing our plants And we need to be using the right plants as well. We need these heavy root feeding plants to get the roots down into the soil as fast as possible and start using this soil, and like they kind of till it, they add soil, they release oxygen into it, and they'll promote all these processes. Whereas, you know, if the roots aren't in there for whatever reason, we're just gonna snowball into different problems, like loads of organics with low oxygen is going to start creating these anaerobic problems. So there is all of the information you need to understand. I hope you can see the principles that we need to focus on, the factors, the most important 3 factors. So I hope you can see the principles we need to focus on and what stuff is irrelevant to that, and then I hope you understand the key factors, the CO2, the light and the nutrients, and how to balance them. Obviously, like Tom Ball said, an excess of nutrients isn't important as long as we've got CO2 and light in balance. And then obviously I've talked through the micronutrients and the macronutrients, so all these tie into any type of planted tank, whether it's low tech, high tech, dated. Every type of planted tank needs to focus on these 3 principles, these 3 factors, and we're golden. As long as they're running, we're doing our job, doing our water changes to get excess stuff out. We're promoting our dissolved organic carbons or compounds, however you don't want to define them. Everything's in check, we're done. Like, I know you've seen this video. I hope you can sit down and think to yourself, right, I understand what I actually need to focus on now when I'm setting up a dated tank, when I'm setting up like a Walstad tank, and all the stuff that is irrelevant doesn't actually tie into any of this. So I'm better informed now of focusing on getting my CO2 levels balanced with my light, and then how to correctly focus on nutrients for me planted tank. And then you can set it all up in the knowledge that what you're doing is right, and then obviously you can think to yourself, I'm balancing my light with my CO2, I'm balancing my water changes, so I'm not getting excessive nutrients, but what I'm also doing is promoting the build-up of these dissolved organic compounds, and this will offer you an extra layer of protection. Now, the reason why I like the Walstad method and dated tanks is because I'm not one of these people where plants come first. I appreciate plants, I enjoy plants, but my fish come first, and I feel like a dated tank like the Walstad method, I don't have to worry about dosing tanks with nutrients. I don't have to necessarily worrying about running CO2 and all the maintenance that comes with these high things, and all the maintenance that comes with these high level things, and then all the extra maintenance that comes in. I want to focus on my fish, enjoy a planted tank, and I feel like these dated tanks, this Walstad method, which the Walstad method isn't putting dirt in, capping it, planting your plants, putting water in. The Walstad method is promoting all these processes, the changing of your water, getting the excess nutrients out, making sure you're building up dissolved organics, making sure you're feeding your fish enough, that you're providing the plants with enough nutrients to grow. Otherwise your plants are going to stop growing and algae can take over. And that's the method, not just adding dirt. Like every video I watch, it's just setting the tank up. That's the setup. That's not the method. The method is what I've done after I've set my tank up. And I hope you can understand all this. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope it gives you more confidence to say, right, I understand what we're achieving with the dated tank now, and all the rest of it's just noise. It doesn't mean anything, it's just rhetoric. It's just people saying stuff because they don't understand this bit. So there you go, guys. I hope you appreciate that. If you enjoy what I've talked about, please consider giving this video a like. If you want to see more Walstad talk, please consider being a sub. If you've got any questions, ask me in the comments section. If you're going to leave anything negative in the comment section, at least add a bit of substance, at least put something into your argument for a change. That'd be nice. Cheers guys, take care.